This is GST 7130, Module 6 on web mapping clients, specifically Leaflet. I'm your instructor, Robert Hewlett, and you can contact me via the email address below. The learning outcomes for this lecture, although not an absolute list, one should be able to compare popular web mapping clients, describe the Leaflet philosophy, describe Leaflet and related tech, describe the Leaflet hooks. How do we hook in Leaflet? Very similar to Bootstrap in the end. Describe the map class, describe map panes, describe map layers, base and others. I want to distinguish between base layers and other layers. Describe tiled layers, and describe GeoJSON integration in Leaflet. We're going to talk about mapping clients. The big three would be ArcGIS, of course. It's sort of an enterprise scale framework. It's meant to work with all ArcGIS web services, from ArcGIS Server and the portal, host of feature services, image services, geoprocessing services. It's framework based. Part of it's still based out of Dojo in that, but as modern web development changes, they also have their JavaScript libraries available for architectures like Snowpack and Vite. It is the core API for Ego. So when we're talking about what does ArcGIS Online use for its map, dashboards, getting data, a lot of that plumbing is this API. So it's a little bit beyond the map. So that's one thing to realize. Yeah, it's just not the map. It has support concepts in the geodatabase, like the file geodatabase and the enterprise enabled geodatabase, attribute rules, contingency values, domains, subtypes. So if there's a concept that you use storage-wise with the geodatabase in Pro, they try to support as much as they can of that also on the web, those concepts. There's OpenLayers, pretty good library. And that it's open sourced, used by many. So you may not realize it, but when you use a product like GeoServer and you preview a layer, it pulls OpenLayers in. QGIS Map Server, a lot of them have OpenLayers kind of embedded in that. Could be because of their licensing agreement. So other people use it too. And so you may not, the thing about OpenLayers, you may not think you're using it, and then you find out later that you are. And of course, there's Leaflet. It's Mapbox linked. There is a linkage there between Mapbox. I believe Leaflet arrived first, and then they hired the person who built Leaflet at Mapbox. So there's a lot of technology or interrelated technology, the ability to work with Mapbox vector tiles, and some of the Mapbox libraries build off of Leaflet in that. So there's a little bit of a crossover in that, or roots in. I mean, Leaflet does have a mobile focus, and KISS, keep it simple, and that. And so it may not offer all of the things that ArcGIS at the enterprise level offers and OpenLayers offers and that. But the idea is for a mobile web developer, a mobile developer that needs a map in their app, the essentials of what I call, one of our problems are always solved, dots on a map, right? I have a base map, I need to get my dots on there, whatever they might be. It can do more sophisticated things than that, but if that's your core focus, and to be really fast at it too, and so one thing that comes across ArcGIS and OpenLayers is the support for other projections. It's kind of commonplace. Leaflet is there's lots of little things where it really focuses on one projected system. It's not that it can't do others, but it's built around, focused on really fast at WebMacator. And we'll talk about that in future slides. And that is a common projection used for base maps from Google, Bing, Esarai, and that. So that projection. So they focus on that, and by making some assumptions that, hey, that's the base map that we're going to be in, they can actually, fine-tune or really focus their searches on finding out, hey, what tile am I on in this particular system. And we'll talk more about that tiling scheme too as well. And so here's the pitch. This is the philosophy of Leaflet, right? So the idea is, and this is from the horse's mouth right off their site. It's an open source JavaScript library. Leaflet part is, yeah, mobile friendly. In that, not all JavaScript APIs are mobile friendly, and I've seen people take mobile friendly JavaScript APIs and use them in a way that made their app non-mobile friendly. I've seen, recent experience builder templates in that would never fit on a mobile device, even though it's made with React. So this can happen, right? But the idea is that it was built to be mobile friendly, really small. That's part of the friendliness too. Like if you're on a phone and you're on your data plan and you're sharing some cell tower with all these other people, grabbing a 5 megs of JavaScript files can really slow down your app. So they try to keep it as terse, slim as possible, so that again, your app loads well on a mobile device. Less is always more in these cases. Features that most developers need, and that's really important, right? Most features, so the common stuff. Is it going to do everything that ArcGIS JavaScript API can do? No way. Not, and they don't even intend to. It's not their market, their niche area, right? We're talking about a web developer, a mobile developer. Hey, I had to get some dots on a map or something, and that, or it could be something like a Runtastic. So that was an app I had, and they had, hey, the run or the bike you just did, they could plot it over Google Earth, like convert it to KML and show it on top of the map. Simple stuff like that. Like, we're not trying to solve every problem out there, every enterprise problem, but just nice, quick and dirty map. That's what we're after, right? Simplicity, performance, usability, things like that. And you want to be able to ramp up on the technology at first. The JavaScript API, ArcGIS one, it can be overwhelming, and open layers too, like where to start. There's just so much, right? And when you have less, then it's okay. This is the whole toolbox. Okay, it's in here somewhere, and that works across desktop and mobile. Okay, a lot of the JavaScript libraries can get by, but they focus on making sure that it works on mobile as well. Can be extended with plugins. So if something, and there's plugin list is big. It's big. Some really strange things. If I'm honest, on some of it, I'm still in a state of disbelief because I know it's all JavaScript that has to do all the work, and I'm like, whew, that could be tough. But they're out there, and so we'll take a look at some of the plugins towards the end of the lecture. Well-documented API, that's what they proclaim. Meh, I'm on the maybe side, right? That sort of thing. I don't know if any API does this well, but the whole thing about when you deal with one of these libraries, application programmable interfaces, that's what API stands for, you really have to get into the designer's head to see, well, how do they see this? How do they conceptualize a map, a layer in that? These are common concepts in JS, but how did this developer see it? And it's always the challenge. It doesn't matter what the library or API is you're an outsider, and you got to get inside someone else's head and understand how they've organized things. Like when you do that, then you get faster. You learn the learning curve it's not as sharp in that. And that's always the challenge for me. Is any new library is trying to figure out how they see it design wise, and like they'll have some maybe not even documented workflows that hey, this is how you make a map, and this is how you add a layer, and this is the best way. Because I went down some rabbit holes trying to test some stuff around the lab, and as I went down those rabbit holes, and some of them did not bear fruit, but I did gain insight into how they see some of the ways of organizing spatial data on the map. And once I broke through that, then it became easier to make something happen in that. And that's what development's all about, trying to make something happen. So I want to talk about the gang, right? And that leaflet, friends, and derivatives. Okay, and this slide might expand a little bit more in that. So this is one of these areas, as you dig deeper, you find and discover more things. So there is a close association with Leaflet and Mapbox in that. So the developer of Leaflet, I believe, still works at Mapbox in that. And so then there's the concept over at Mapbox of vector tiles. Vector tiles are, they were a huge thing 5 years ago, 6 years. They still are, right? It's probably the way to deliver data, like base mapping data. So most maps, when I go dots on a map, well, there's this concept of a map, or there's this base layer that you're going to show up that's kind of what we call canned, pre-rendered, static, but it helps you locate yourself in that. A lot of investment in this area. And vector tiles is probably the way to ship it across the internet. I mean, so much so that a database like Postgres has functions inside of Postgres with the PostGIS extension, the spatial extension, has spatial functions that will convert your data into Mapbox vector tiles and send them to you, right? That's how popular they are, right? That has been built right into the database. There's Mapbox GL, graphics language for our mobile devices. This kind of mimics what Leaflet does, but it does it in like OpenGL instructions on your mobile phone, really snappy. Okay. Now the licensing agreement around that changed and that spawned LibreMap. Sort of, they forked the product, and there's a community that supports it. So LibreMap is Mapbox GL post the licensing change in that, and so there's a big community around there. And so if you're wondering, hey, where do I get Mapbox GL? Probably if you want to deploy it in a reduced risk, like reduced licensing risk, probably go with LibreMap and that. So how to start? That's a good question. So the first steps, as we've seen with Bootstrap, is you got to have a little bit of HTML. You know, you got to have a starter page. In modern web development, you still need it. It may immediately tie into a bunch of JavaScript and cascading style sheets, but you do need that little C document that pulls everyone in. So you need a little bit of HTML with some hooks. A lot of the quick and dirty samples will just show you working inside the HTML. I prefer an external file just to keep things clean. I like to separation of concerns, JavaScript in a JavaScript file, cascading style sheet stuff in a cascading style sheet file, HTML and HTML file. That's just me. Okay. So you need a link tag to bring in the Leaflet CSS. This has, in order matters, this has to be done first. Then bring in the Leaflet JavaScript. Okay. Now you might have other cascading style sheets and JavaScript to bring in as well from other frameworks like Bootstrap. But have these two close together. Pull in the CSS first, the JavaScript second. You need a div, right? That's how it usually works. You need a div with an ID, right? So you have to stamp the ID, and that this is where the map will live. It's also, you need a style that links to that div. So you need a selector for the ID above, right? In that. So you need a div with an ID. You need a select with a matching ID to give the map some size. Usually a minimum height, and then if you don't say anything, it'll take, you know, full page width in that. So besides the Leaflet CSS and the Leaflet JavaScript, you're going to need a little bit of a div in an HTML, and you're going to need your own selector. So you're probably going to need your own cascading style sheet, is what I would recommend. Okay, so need height at a minimum. You'll need a script tag that initializes the map. Okay, or inits, that's short for initialize in computer speak. And so that's the thing where you got to typically, you make a map. You typically want to make a layer too, so you can actually see something, and then your map appears. Often you want to set what the center of the map is. Hey, go zoom to this to make sure you're, you know, it's working in that. How this is organized is up to you, but I've stated my philosophy where I can. Cascading style sheet stuff in a CSS file, and JavaScript stuff in a JavaScript file, and HTML stuff in an HTML file. That's me in that. For a quick and dirty sample, people like one files who like to do like embedded style, and they like to do script tags inside the HTML. It's not bad for like, hey, I just want everything in one page. I don't want to have to make a bunch of directories. But even in, you'll see in my demos, I just stick with my standard technique. Just sort of have one streamlined workflow of how to deal with this. Because eventually, if it's going to be a starter for a bigger project, you're going to need to scale up, and then you will want everything in separate files and not a bunch of spaghetti code, as they say. And like I say here, I agree with myself. I like a function in an external file that sets everything up. With some global variables in the demos, I'll try to touch on that, how it works. Because there are no rules in JavaScript, then you'll see lots of different approaches, and so it can be very confusing. I'll obviously demo my approach. I don't think it's a bad one, but there's a little bit of, okay, let's get organized first, right? So before we start, let's get things organized, get everything hooked in. Okay, let's go, kind of concept. Now, the question for you would be, do I download it or do I use a content delivery network, CDN? So in that, so what's the difference? Depends. I would suggest to download because it will be stable while you're developing, right? And again, these rant videos of JavaScript, I'll try to get them into the playlist. People are always updating their code, and the thing is that can cause a bug with you, and then how much time do you want to burn with that, or maybe you have to rewrite your code because there's new technique and stuff. So there is this concept, you get a freeze on a certain version or freeze with a certain part of the library and then build off that. And so it can be more stable while you're developing, so that you're just troubleshooting your code, not brand new code from the Leaflet group. And so while you're developing, it might be stable to download it and set all the files up locally, might be, that sort of thing. Definitely stable for production. You don't want a production app that's been tested, verified to work with a certain series or certain version of libraries to have that version dynamically change on you and break the app. So definitely at the production level, if you're going to make a web app that uses Leaflet for the mapping part, then you want that part frozen because you don't want that changing on you and potentially breaking your app, okay? And that sort of thing. Now, there's nothing against CDNs. You just got to be aware that, okay, how stable is this? It's a live link, so it's going to pull the files each time. That sort of deal. You get the latest features, maybe. Depends which CDN you tie into. You might get the latest features. You get the latest bugs too. And this is why I talk about stability and that sort of thing. It's a quick start and dirty because you can just I just link it in, and you can have those in snippets ready to go. Paste these in, boom, and I've got it. I don't have to go to some website and download something to check versions. I'll just grab this one here and go for it in that. So it's a quick start, and there's that word. It can get a little dirty on you, right? If things are changing. I ran into issues just 2 days ago. You can't have man-in-the-middle problems in that. So someone could corrupt the files or change the files in transit in that. So did you really get Leaflet's version of that, or did someone mess with something? That's always a thing. There is a sort of a resource integrity that can be applied. So we'll talk about that in a future slide. I don't want to talk too much now, get ahead of myself, but you can do some stuff to counteract that. So this is the future slide, sub-resource integrity. That's what SRI stands for. In that, it's a base 64 encoding cryptography hash. So you can look at the size of the file as well as the contents of the file, come up with sort of like a foot-long code in that tests, hey, did the file change? Because if something changes in the file, then a different cryptography hash would be generated. So the people from Leaflet or whoever uses this says it should calculate this big long cryptography hash. And so you get the files, you test it, and you find out, hey, it's not the same. And then you know something changed inside that particular file. Now, this technique of cryptography hashes is used all over the place. GitHub, Git, just to make sure, like the whole hashing technique, to make sure that, you know, the file as is has not been changed. It's a way of checking to say, and that it's even used on certain file systems too, Btrfs, ZFS, so that it can look at disk integrity, like is there something going on with the hard disk? Is the file corrupted because there was this hash that said it should have been this number, but we just recalculated it with something on disk and it seems to be broken. It's like there's an error in the file. And so it gets self-healing file systems. I'm a bit off on a tangent, but it's just that this kind of thing where we take a file and produce this unique code based on its content. We can then check the file again, whether it's in the file system or whether it's coming over to the web, to ensure that, okay, it hasn't changed, right? It hasn't been altered or messed with or tweaked in that, infected with something, right? It's based on, in our case, the text in the file, right? And it can be added to the script, like any JavaScript. Did anyone mess with the JavaScript? Did anyone mess with the cascading style sheets kind of concept? And so we can put these cryptography hashes on all these files, generate them and put them on and say, look, when you get this file, it should generate this code. And if it doesn't, you know, something went wrong in that. This is what, there's a couple different techniques in that. This is sort of the foot-long code that gets generated. And it'll be different for every file depending on the contents. But it's a way you can say, verify that what you asked for is what you got and no one changed anything in that. And so this is, I mean, where this would come into play is if you're, you know, downloading live through a CDN, content delivery network. So if the text in the file does not match, they won't produce the same code, and so the file's been altered, and you can choose to reject it for security reasons. Now, what's the cons? Because, you know, in the end, messages, you just keep all your career. Everything's a trade-off, right? There's no perfect system. You're trading off something, whether you know it or not. And those trade-offs are never free in that. So the hash has to be generated and compared. So that is work that your browser has to do, right? And you might be on a beefy enough machine that, you know, you don't even notice it kind of concept. So there will be a performance hit that, you know, but, right, will one notice? You may not notice, right? Compared to all the other stuff going on in your desktop, you know, Sentinel checking for viruses and, you know, Windows Defender, it may pale in comparison to what those other pieces of software that are running on your machine are chewing up in terms of CPU and RAM, right? But yeah, it's not, it does have to be generated, it does have to be compared and that sort of thing. So it's not, like I said, nothing's for free, but we could be in a zone where we're not feeling it, right? And maybe we're not feeling the desktop, but we do feel it on the phone. See, that's nothing too, right? So all depends, right? That's why you have alpha and beta testing to see if it is a problem, right? So you might not feel it. So what you can do now is pause this video lecture and watch the demo, where I'll just basic leaflet stuff with a CDN check, and you'll see the sub-resource integrity check as well. So what I want to do now is just review some of the key points from the demo. So you saw a classic pull of the cascading style sheet for leaflet with its SRID, subsource resource integrity check. Right? You saw the same for the leaflet JavaScript file, subsource with a subsource resource integrity check. You saw my separation of concerns. I had a JavaScript folder where my JavaScript resided, separate folder. I had a cascading style sheet folder, and I showed the selector in there. I had the HTML with the div with the ID that matched that selector, right? So when things don't work, this is where you got to look. You know, are my files linked in properly? Do the names of my selector and my ID on my div match? All that kind of stuff in code, does it match, right? You saw some global variables plus some other functions for handling the pop-up in that. And you saw my init map, where you make the map and you make a base layer map, kind of stuff, and I zoom it with a pop-up just so it's not a bad place to start, because in the lab you're going to need to put in lat longs. So that little demo, at least you can grab some lat longs of some places as you decide to make your circle and your polygon and stuff like that. I'm going to switch gears to focus in a little bit on the map object. It's got lots of stuff. We can't cover it all in that, but if we can get into some of the big pieces, that would help. So we're going to talk about the map a little bit. First is like setting or changing the state. So there's a lot of stuff here about like set the view, go to this rectangle and zoom in, or just to set the zoom level, like step in a little bit, or zoom in or zoom out, or fit to the bounds. Fit to the bounds is an interesting one. I talk about dots on the map as one problem we're trying to solve. Another problem we solve a lot is zoom to feature, run a report. And so fit to bounds would fit to the bounds of this piece of geometry. Fit the world, your original map extent. Pan by, fly to and fly to bounds have a little bit of animation built in that. But now if you can see the state is just changing where the map is looking. There's lots of different ways to do that. There are layers and controls in that, and so we can add controls. So there's like zoom in, zoom out controls. There are layer controls for switching base layers, turning layers off and on. In that, scale bar controls. We'll talk more, we have them on a slide, but you need to be able to add controls, remove controls. We can add layers, remove layers. You can ask the question, hey, does this layer exist on this map? And then apply a function for each layer, do this. Right, and then we have pop-ups associated with layers and tooltips also associated with layers as well in that. So we also get the state of the map, right? So what's the current center of the map, where we zoom to, what is the extent, get bounds of the map, what's the minimum zoom, maximum zoom, what is the size of the actual map being displayed in the browser, all these types of things. Events are always fun. This is how you build interactivities. What do you want to do when someone clicks on the map? In my demo, I wanted to pop up where they clicked, right? Helps you, will help you get the lat longs you need for the lab, that demo. When someone double clicks, left mouse button down, probably left mouse button comes up. What if you hover a mouse over? When the mouse moves out of the map, right? Or just when the mouse moves, right? What about a context menu, like a right click typically? So that would be, typically a right mouse button click. What happens if someone's on the map and they, hit a certain key? Do you want something like gaming keys? What is it? Might be WSAD or something like that. There's some set of keys, right? In the special event called pre-click, it's if you need something to happen, there was a click event, you need something to happen just before the click event, kind of concept. I'm going to talk about map panes as well in that. So these are some of the map panes that are built into the map. It gives you some idea into design, but it also is a rabbit hole I went down that you don't need to go down. So the lab, we learned how to put stuff on the map. So immediately my question was, how do I get stuff off the map, right? That's me, right? Although I like the gas pedal, I also like to know where the brake is too. So if I can put stuff on the map, I won't be able to take it off, right? And so I went down this rabbit hole of panes, and there are these panes that are built in to the map in that. But I think these panes are really shared across all layers, and the way a GS person would think of it would be, add layers to a map or remove layers to a map. That kind of concept. I turn layers on, I turn layers off. So in the head, you're thinking layers. So I said, well, are panes like layers? The quick answer is absolutely not, and that sort of thing. And so what you can see is there are these panes built in. You can remove them and bring them back. You would have to set their Z index to get back to the original. They say they're all the same. I would argue from my code, because I ran into a problem that I could get rid of markers, but I also had to get rid of their shadows. That's an interesting thing too. But we'll go over some of these. Like so the Z index is how high in the stack or who draws above who. Okay, so the tile pane would be like your base maps. They're the lower ones. The overlay panes is where you're adding layers like GeoJSON layers, maybe markers, and that. Well, I can't say markers. Markers have their own pane. But if you're adding other layers like circles and polygons, they end up on this overlay pane. The shadow pane is really part of the markers. The shadow pane and the marker pane are paired. Like every time you have a marker, there's a little shadow. So when I was first doing the code, I would delete the marker, but my map would look dirty. I'm going, what's going on? Right? That's because there was this shadow that I also had to delete, sort of thing. Right out of Peter Pan in that. And there's a tooltip pane and a pop-up pane. And so they're using the Z index. And this is nothing too, is that this is where we come out of their JavaScript API and use regular HTML elements. So, and they organize them using the Z index from cascading style sheets. And so that tiles are the lowest in the stack, then any layers that you add in terms of circles and polygons, then the shadow for a marker, then the marker itself, then any tooltips that might pop up, and then the pop-up pane, like when you click on the map or you click on a circle, its pop-up. They're the highest in the 700. And they space them out, right? So that you can have, hundreds of overlays in that if you want. Now, you can also have your own panes in that. So what would be a good use of you having your own pane? You might want to have like an editing pane where you let someone draw a polygon or draw a line. And when they're okay with it, like a sketch tool is called in like ArcGIS Online. So you can draw your sketch, and if you're okay with it, okay, that's what I want to draw, save that and send it back to the server. That would be a good use of the pane. Managing layers, not a good way to do it, but this is the rabbit hole I went down. And like I said, I could get the marker and shadow to work. I could add stuff, remove it, and add it back. And I could get the overlay, I could add stuff, and I could remove stuff from the overlay pane, but once I removed stuff from the overlay pane, I couldn't add stuff anymore. So it could be a bug and that sort of thing. But why did I go down that path? Well, you do some searching, you go down Stack Overflow, you get worried because you check the dates, 2013, they say this is how you're supposed to do it. And, okay, maybe that was the way to do it back in 2013. I think if you want to create objects, then add them like a layer and remove them like a layer, and then you can turn them off and on. Kind of concept. The pane thing is interesting. Okay, create multiple choice question later on for an exam. But my view now, after working with it, being frustrated with the code and finding a different solution, the pane thing would be more about like you having a very special overlay. And the one that comes to mind for me would be editing, like in that. So you have a pane where you say you place objects for editing, you let people move them around. And then when they're satisfied, then you can just grab that geometry and send it back to a server to be saved, whether it's a OGC web mapping feature service with Transact or an Easter-I host of feature services that has editing turned on or something like that. But that's how I would use panes. But there was a time back in 2013, 2014 where people were trying to use this like turning off and on layers, right? And so I would say that's not a good use for panes. In that, you might have like an app where you load a shapefile. So maybe you want to have a place where recently loaded data goes into its own pane, and maybe you'll position it somewhere between the overlays and the shadow pane or something like that. And so that might make sense. Or here's another one. So we said loading up a shapefile or an editing pane. What about it tying into a geoprocessing service? You're gonna have click on a map somewhere, that location is going to be used to feed a geoprocessing service. A bunch of stuff's going to happen. Maybe it buffers the point, clips some data in the background. It's going to send you a result. You may want to have a pane, like a results pane, where you show this is a result of the geoprocessing. So I think those kind of concepts would be good for panes and that. And you can always get the panes from the map. These are the stock ones that are there all the time by default. You can remove them, then you get yourself in trouble in that. But what you might notice is that you can have a whole bunch of layers that use markers, but all your data from all your different layers are going to be put into this marker pane to be displayed and is paired with the shadow pane and that. So panes are interesting, but don't use them for like when you're going to have a base map with a bunch of layers that you're turning off and on kind of concept. But if you're going to have a special editing pane, geoprocessing results pane, that sort of thing, file upload pane or something, maybe that might be a good use for panes. But if you're thinking layers, there's different techniques that I'll go over in demos. Layers, yes, the ghost of SVG. Now there's an official listing of layers in that. So this is different than panes. I want to clarify this. Again, this is all about trying to get into someone else's head, the original developer, how they saw stuff. And there's your experience with tools like ArcPro or QGIS and how it does layers, but then it's like this developer had a different angle, slant on the problem and that. And so we'll talk about layers. And I call it the ghost of SVG because when you look at SVG, maybe we'll pop this page after, you'll start to see, okay, that's why we're using these names, because you'll see stuff like path. Now I'm familiar with SVG and I said, well, I've used that before when I was trying to have a polygon with a hole in it. I had used path in that. Polyline, I've seen that before. And polygon, this is my problem. My history with SVG was I needed to punch a hole in the polygon, but polygons in SVG don't have holes. Paths do, and stuff like that. You can have a special polygon like odd even stuff, but it's messy. It's not what you're thinking in terms of JS speak. Optimize rectangle, so there's like a lower left, upper right, or however you want it. There's 2 points that describe your rectangle. Away you go, kind of concept. A lot of these, okay, this might be a good time to mention this. A lot of these are built around lat long. And so that means the coordinates are actually YX. So you should probably be aware that lat long is a YX system, not an XY system. When we get into GeoJSON, we flip, and then we have to be careful. So a lot of these seem to be a lat long deal or adjusted for lat long. But when I look at these are SVG words that I've seen before. Circle, circle marker, and then you see SVG overlay and SVG. So you're like, hey, there's something like these original layers, because what they're trying to do is, hey, there's a bunch of stuff in HTML5. Let's use as much as we can to handle drawing these primitives in that. So it'd be a good thing. I'm just going to click on this link and it'll pop open the W3 schools, and we'll take a look, like an intro into SVG. And look, polygon, polyline, path. Okay, and you'll see a lot of the styling elements when you give it a color, it's following the SVG rules and that sort of thing. Ooh, drop shadows, all these things. Hey, we have a shadows pane. So you can see there's some SVG roots in the leaflet layers, which is okay. It's in that, but it's always good to know, okay, what's the background on this? Because then to work effectively with these, the more you know about SVG, then it's a lot easier, like setting colors and that sort of thing. A lot easier to get set up in that. So SVG is part of the HTML5 spec. It's scalable vector graphics. And so it's another great thing to actually add to your quiver, right? Add to your toolbox in that, especially if you're doing leaflet. That's where a lot of these original, hey, we need to draw something quickly on a map. Hey, let's use SVG as an HTML element overlay, and that'll problem solved, right? And it's standard based and all that. Okay. You can also draw it directly on the canvas, which is another HTML5 deal. Drawing on the canvas. There are other layers, right? And there's a ton when you go to plugins, but we're not there yet in that. So we call these non-OG and that original. There's something called layer group. In that, there's something called feature group. Feature group is actually a descendant, a child object of layer group. So whatever layer group has, feature group has. So if you have a bunch of circles or polygons that you want to put on the map, you may want to organize them in a feature group, because then they act like a layer. It's easier in the controls to turn them on and off, kind of concept in that. But when you use feature group, what you're doing is you're grabbing a bunch of geometric primitives. They have about 8 circles, and I'm going to organize them kind of like in a layer, which is what happens. And then you add the feature group to the map like a layer, and you can turn it on and off, add, remove, those types of stuff. There's GeoJSON. GeoJSON is very popular. GeoJSON is a JSON version of well-known text from OGC. Of course, they have to change the parsing characters to match JSON, but it's structured in a very similar way in that, and a very popular format for web services sending out spatial data right to your app. So there's lots even Easter services. So you can request, hey, don't send me Easter JSON, send me GeoJSON, and then it'll just slide right into the map in Leaflet and that. Okay, there's also a grid layer and that as well. And so then the thing is, you can bring in your things, treat them as layers, and make a bunch of features, group them together as a feature group, and then kind of add that as a layer to the map. And then when you populate the controls, you can turn things off and on GeoJSON as well too. Now, even more layers, right? There's the user interface layers, right? Markers. And this is related to panes, right? You're gonna this relates to the map panes. Markers and their shadows, those two panes are kind of together. Pop-ups, right? It's a type of what they call div overlay in that. And there's like, typically, when you do a pop-up, it's based on someone clicking on the map, you fire, or clicking on a map or clicking on your marker, you add a pop-up. Depends who the pop-up is associated with. It's associated with the map, the marker, feature group, that kind of concept. Tooltips, right? Now you start to see, okay, those sound like the panes, right? So there's these layers above your map. There's your base map, and then a bunch of, like, we'll call GIS layers, roads, city points of cities stuff. But then there's all these markers and pop-ups and tooltips as well. Okay. Now, tooltips typically fire on hover. Do they have to? No, but usually the way people click on a map, people click on features on a map, and usually tooltips is like if you hover over a feature, it fires. It doesn't have to be that way. It's just traditional. So even more layers. And these are via plugins. So this would be some more JavaScript that you would have to link in that. So if we have base maps from ESRI, we can get them in Azure, Bing. And there's others as well, but those are some big ones there. Google. That base map formats, right? Those are providers, like what format. So you can, CartoDB has its kind of own format. Geo raster layer, GeoTIFF. So if you already have like a GeoTIFF already out there, you can slide that in. And that OGC web mapping service, web tile mapping services, web coverage services, tile GeoJSON is an interesting one. Right now, the JSON will come in one big chunk in that, but why not tile it like we do the base maps, like we do Mapbox vector tiles? Chop it up with the same tile scheme, and you can just stream it in. It should make the app more responsive. And so we can also just load GS data formats directly. A lot of these other ones you're talking to some type of service made by ESRI, some REST JSON service or some SOAP XML service. But what if you could just load the shapefile directly? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? That sort of thing. So they say there's a plugin, I haven't tested this, that if you have a file geodatabase out there somewhere on the web, you could read it directly in. No need for a service. If you have a GeoCSV file, it can be brought in right away. That usually means that the geometry specified in well-known text. GPX is an interesting XML format that comes off of some Garmin receivers in that with tracks and track points. So they say there's a plugin to read that directly. They say they can read a shapefile directly. So if you have a series of files that represent a shapefile data set out there posted on the web somewhere, it can bring that in, slurp it up, and put it onto the map. And an OGC Geo package, which is an SQLite database. These very interesting things, because what's the difference here? What it means is no middleware. You hit the data directly. A lot of the other stuff is you would have to have create a service based on these formats, and then that service is like ESRI JSON, or ESRI doing GeoJSON, or OGC doing SOAP XML, or OGC doing GeoJSON, right? So those middleware products, GeoServer, ArcGIS Server, convert these formats into a format that your browser can understand. But what they're saying is, hey, we got some wicked JavaScript, might be slow, but we can hit that directly without middleware, which is kind of interesting, right? KML, the GPX is an XML format like KML, so that's just chopping up XML files, which you would have to do for SOAP XML web services anyway. So that though the brains to do that is already out there for a long time. Okay, and there's lots of other formats once you dig in on the plugins. Talk a little bit about map controls, switch gears here. Okay, what are the map controls? Well, there's a zoom in, zoom out control, the plus minus icon, attribution, and that, so you can add, of course, remove on the fly. Layers, this is a classic thing you want on some maps, is the ability to turn on and off layers, right? You can add different base layers. So there's a base layer switcher built in that. It's like a radio button. The overlays, so layers are considered overlays. You add overlays in that, and they show up like a traditional table of contents layer with a checkbox that you can turn off and on, right? Remove layers, of course, in that, and a scale control as well. We can have lots of debates about whether that makes sense on phones and tablets and that, but it's there if you need it. What you can do now is pause this video lecture and watch the Demo 2 control demo. Talk a little bit about base maps, which I always have to immediately correct. They're layers, right? Base maps are not maps, they're layers. They're just on the very bottom of the stack, and you draw your dots, lines, polygons, circles, whatever you're drawing on top of them. So the base map layer, right? One thing we should talk about is a lot, and this is where, Leaflet focuses on WebMacator, right? So a lot of these base maps are projected. They are WebMacator. So Google, Bing, ArcGIS, Mapbox, Vector Tiles. So that's a projection called 3857. You can look it up on European Petroleum Survey Group, epsgeo.io, and the number, and that. And so the origin is the equator and the central meridian. Okay, that is your origin. That's 0, 0, right? Over by the Gulf of Guinea in Africa, in that. The bounds are in the 20 million range, negative, positive, right? So they're really big numbers. They're not lat longs, right? But we've been working with lat longs. But that's what the base map is kind of built in, okay? And that. It's a part of this, besides being a projected coordinate system, when we talk 3857, there's this elephant in the room, is that along with that is this quad tree index tiling scheme, right? So zoom level 1 is the whole world centered on the equator and central meridian. Zoom level 1, we get 4 rectangles to break up the world, right? And then zoom level 2, we get 16 and that. And it keeps going as well. And now the original Google Maps one, 28 zoom levels. Some of these systems have less. Bing might only go to 22 zoom levels in that. The 28 zoom levels get you down to an interesting level of detail in that. Is whether your services, ArcGIS server, OpenLayers, if you've generated all the map caches, they're called, or tiles ahead of time at that level. But the concept is 0 is the whole world centered on equator, central meridian. And this is the bounds in meters. It was a meter system too. So that's 20 million meters and that sort of deal concept and that. So you get, if you get raw Mercator coordinates, they can look quite big. They don't quite fit with UTMs. They don't quite fit with Mel Bell Bears projections you might be used to in BC. So you get these really big numbers. And if you're in our neck of the woods, really big negative numbers in that. But we always use lat long. And I'm going to emphasize here that's a YX system, just so you know. The Y is stated first. Lat is Y, long is X. And there's reasons for that because of the location managers on your phone and tablet, and the web API that also has a location thing, which reports you lat long, YX. And so, like I said, the Leaflet API library is tuned for developers to say, look, it's going to be coming at you this way on your phone and tablet. Just drop it in and we'll take care of it for you, right? Now, The lat long is assumed to be 4326. That means the WGS84 sphere in that, and that's the classic on phones, tablets, and the web API. So when you do a location thing with a web app, the location manager even there will report back to you a lat long, okay? And that is a YX. But Leaflet's setup is to grab whatever those are sending to you and immediately use it to zoom the map around. They'll take care of the math that will change your lat long into a Web Mercator coordinate for you and get you to the right location on the map. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the OpenStreetMap tile server, just because it's used in lab. So we're going to break down the URL a little bit. The front part is HTTPS. The S is about, well, which usually have a suite of servers set up to farm out or ship out the tiles really fast, like server A, server B, server C kind of concept. Then the Z is what zoom level are we at? So we saw previously, the zoom level concept. And then think X as rows and columns of which tiles. So S is about load balancing or parallel requests by the browser. Z is about what zoom level we are on. You can think of that back on the server. There's a bunch of directories like zoom level 0, 1, 2, 3, and inside there are your subdirectories for X and Y, and then you get to your tiles in that. So what is the X tile coordinate and the Y tile coordinate? That helps us locate eventually a file on disk, and the .png is the file format, right? So it's not a JPEG or a GIF coming, it's a PNG image format coming at you. But a lot of that S you don't mess with too much, you just let the system do that. But the X and the Y, the zoom level, like when you zoom in, you're on a different zoom level, that will switch the tiles or directories on the server that you need to go to. And then think of X and Y as like a rows and column kind of concept. And that's how it's finding which tile it needs to ship to the browser. So now what I have here is the network tab open. And so if you look closely at some of these URLs, you'll see C, tile, OpenStreetMap, zoom level 13, X like row 28, 25, column 2796.png concept. So, back on the server, there could be a directory called 13, right? And with a subdirectory 2825, and then all the Y, then the Y's are which image do you need to make up that column in that. What I'll do is we'll try to do a live demo of this so you can see where when I zoom in that the zoom level changes on the URL in that. And you can see all the different PNGs that are coming to the machine, and they get loaded over here on the side. Okay, so part of this demo we'll look at. Eventually, you can pause this video lecture and watch demo 3. So I'm going to show an interactive demo from Map Tilers so you can see the quad tree, but I'll also try to demo the tiles coming in on the map as well so you can see that, and you can see how the requests are being made. And it's leaflet that figures out these, is it ABCD server, what's our zoom level, what row are we on in terms of X, which columns do we need in terms of Y in that. Switch gears and talk a little bit about GeoJSON. Okay, so the best way to look at this is through a demo. In the demo, I'll make a little bit of GeoJSON. A big thing to pick up on there is that we move off of a YX system into an XY system, so I have to do the coordinates differently. I also have some properties, and I show you how to get those into a pop-up as well. So pause this video lecture and watch demo 4. Okay. So if you have any questions, need to re-examine a topic, or need clarification on a term or concept, you can get an answer by posting a note on the discussion boards for this course. That's all for now.